All right, let's get started tonight. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Autism 209, and I am Gary Stobie. I'm a neurologist in practice here in Washington State, on faculty at UW School of Medicine, and I work at Seattle Children's Autism Center, and excited to be here with you and excited to bring this panel together. Our topic tonight is crisis support for autistic individuals without intellectual impairment. And before I introduce our panelists tonight for this topic, I want to first welcome all the audience members out there on Seattle Children's Facebook Live. This topic has generated a huge amount of interest. We expect thousands to tune in tonight and to watch it afterwards. Tonight's event is being recorded. All of our panelists have given consent to being recorded. So if you make a comment or ask a question in the chat, understand that you are also giving consent to have your comments live online for all of eternity, if you know what I mean. And we will, if we are able to stay on time, we're going to be holding a Q&A at the end. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will do the best that we can to address them. So tonight's content is focused on individuals with autism who do not have associated intellectual disability. And specifically people that are experiencing mental or behavioral health crises. We know crisis stabilization services are also needed for individuals with autism and associated intellectual disability. And you might be aware that we provided a panel presentation last October 2019 on that topic, and focusing on individuals with autism and intellectual and developmental disabilities. That presentation is viewable on our Seattle Children's YouTube Autism 200 channel, along with our other past lectures of the Autism 200 series. Tonight, in this virtual room that I'll be welcoming you all into, we have a panel of caring professionals, advocates, and providers, experts in the field who care deeply about our community and are very much aware of the profound problem with existing crisis stabilization services and supports here in Washington State. We are hoping to use this moment with their presence at this one table in this one room, not just as a symbol of our concern, but a real collaboration and an attempt to imagine real solutions. I will note that there are efforts being made now in our state to address the problems of limited crisis stabilization services for individuals, all individuals with autism who are experiencing behavior and mental health crises. We will hopefully have an opportunity to touch on some of these efforts tonight. So with that, let's introduce our panelists. And here they are, the magic of technology. So hello, everybody. I'm going to introduce you, and I'm not going to go in any particular order. I think I'll go in the order that I see you all. So I'm going to start with Paul Davis. Paul comes here from the Healthcare Authority Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. And thanks, Paul. Paul is focused on the program called Wraparound and Intensive Services, or the WISE program that we'll be hearing about probably throughout tonight. So thanks, Paul. Where are you located right now? You look like you're in your house. Are you
coming to you from beautiful downtown Lacey, Washington, right next to the RAC, the recreational athletic complex, in my bedroom. So good to be with everybody.
Very good. I know your commute is probably not very far right now. You probably go from your bedroom into your living room, but
Yeah.
You're not too far from Olympia as well. So that's thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to go with Don Koenig. I probably got it somewhat close.
Did we get it right? Koenig, right?
Yeah. So Don is coming to us from Vancouver, Washington. Don's a licensed mental health counselor working in the state of Washington since 1988. He's served Medicaid eligible families through the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, connected to the Developmental Disabilities Administration, and is currently Regional Director for Catholic Community Services of Western Washington. Don, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I like your lay back there in the background. That probably has some meaning for you. You want your family, or what's the deal there?
Oh yeah, it's a picture of my daughter and I, and yeah, my heritage is my father is from Germany, immigrated there from there, and on my mother's side from Samoa, and so I have that island connection as well. Glad to be here and join you all tonight.
Very good. Thanks, Don. I'm going to next go to Rachel Nemhauser. Hi, Rachel. And Rachel is a Community and Family Support Program Manager at the ARC of King County. And she's an active member of the disability community since 2009, former member of the Washington State Developmental Disabilities Council, and has been supervisor of the Parent to Parent King County program since 2015. She's also a parent of a 16-year-old autistic son, who you can read about in her blog, nemhouse.com, I believe. Thanks, Rachel. How you doing tonight?
Great. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and great to have your perspective with numerous hats on tonight.
Right.
So
Exactly. Thank you.
All right, and next I'm going to skip over to another state, the state of Michigan. Taylor Robb joining us. Taylor is a self-advocate, identifies as autistic, and has served in years to help others that are also touched by autism. He's currently studying for his degree as a board-certified behavioral analyst, and brings a unique lived perspective to the panel, which we greatly appreciate tonight. Taylor, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Gary.
All right, and you're looking like it's a little later for you, so hopefully we're not keeping you up past your bedtime.
Nah, I live for the night.
Excellent. All right, Taylor, thank you. And next, let me skip over to Molly Savasco. Molly is a colleague of mine at Seattle Children's. She's on the staff as a clinical psychologist. Molly received her PhD training at University of Washington, go Huskies, and then did her internship and postdoctoral training at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles and at UC Davis, where she specialized on a focus in trauma. And so, Molly, great to have your perspective. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Gary. Glad to be here.
Yep, and you're sequestered in your house, it looks like right now, in a nice, safe place. So thanks for hopefully no cats are going to be coming and bombing the video right now.
I'm actually technically at my mom's house because she promised dinner after this. So hopefully all we need to worry about is mom bombs.
Perfect. Well, hopefully she keeps it warm for you, and you get to dinner on time. And last on our panel, last but not least, great colleague for many years of mine, Lindsay Miller. Lindsay is a psychiatric nurse practitioner on staff at Seattle Children's, Gonzaga undergrad, University of Washington grad, go Huskies again, is supervisor of our advanced practice R&P program in psychiatry at Seattle Children's. So Lindsay, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Gary. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Is the little one going to come in and give us a surprise entrance, or?
We already said goodnight. It's going to be a little bit of a different routine in our house. I'm usually the bedtime parent, but he's helping Dad put together his new desk, and then they'll transition to stories and songs in bed, hopefully. So I might mute if we hear background noise.
Yeah. Well, an example of you being resilient and adapting tonight. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for your whole family for letting us have you. So before we get to the questions that we have shared with the panel that you guys have prepared for tonight, I wanted to kind of give a little framework for the audience. So I want to spend just a couple minutes to kind of talk about, like, why is this topic important, and who are we talking about, and why is it important? You know, we know that mental health crises are serious events. They're potentially life-threatening events. They occur at a higher rate for children, adolescents, and adults on the autism spectrum compared to the general population. Individuals with autism without intellectual disability a group that we have sometimes termed Asperger's. We've also heard the term high functioning autism at times. This group has an even higher rate of suicidality, depression, and anxiety. Some studies saying that suicidality is 9 times more common in this population than age-matched peers. This is one of the reasons actually that high functioning, quote unquote, I put my quotes in air, that high functioning autism has actually fallen out of favor by many autistic self-advocates, recognizing that this population faces unemployment, faces lack of housing supports, and these mental health crises that we're going to be talking tonight, along with often social isolation, stigma, a lot of challenges and barriers. When we're talking about mental health crises, beyond the obvious danger of injury and death, further challenges can result due to mental health crises. It could stall progress in post-secondary or in education in general, high school, post-secondary education, employment, residential opportunities, constrain the entire family unit. So these are very important issues that we're talking about tonight. When we have this discussion, though, I want everyone in the audience and the panelists alike, to recognize the many strengths that always accompany autism for both children, adolescents, and adults. It's often these strengths that will be key in pulling us out of crisis situations. It's important to recognize that the mental health services that are provided are not intended to cure the autism. And I put that in air quotes also. Mental health services are just like mental health services for anyone in our population. They're intended to help individuals be the best that they can be, to improve their quality of life, and to improve their ability to reach their goals of a happy and healthy life. And so I wanted to create that framework. I just also want to kind of just further define how we are defining crises tonight. So we're defining it as an acute psychiatric event, such as an attempted suicide, self-injury, or dangerous impulsivity that requires immediate intervention. When we're thinking of this type of event, we're also thinking about the resources that are immediately available to manage the event and to help prevent a recurrence. And when we talk about resources, we're defining that as basically everything available to the individual, to the parent, to the caregiver, to the person handling the person's dangerous behavior, and the services, or unfortunately many times the lack thereof, that are needed to meet the child or the teen's mental health needs. So with that background, let's get to our questions. Our goal of our questions really is take a look at crisis in this particular population. What does it look like? Maybe understand what are maybe some of the unique needs for an individual in crisis, to learn about services, therapies, resources available, to better understand the barriers to those resources and services, to discuss hopefully what is being done to address those barriers in our state. And if we can stay on time, I hope, to have some time to talk about where we might go in the future and how we can invite the audience together with us in a call of action, because we have to do this all together if we're going to make progress in Washington State. So with that, I get to lead off the first question to Rachel. So Rachel, I'm going to start with you. You've got several lived perspectives for this. What does crisis look like in this population? Maybe, why does it happen? What are some of the common features and situations? What might it look like?
Sure. Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you so much for having me here to be a part of this really incredibly important conversation. The first point I want to make is that it's is that crisis arises in this population for the same reasons that it might arise in the non-disabled population. And it's oftentimes going to look a lot in the same as it would for the non-disabled population. And I think it's important to bring that up and to mention it, because a lot of times I think there's a temptation to attribute extreme behavior or extreme psychiatric distress as just part of the disability, and to not recognize it for what it is by dismissing it too quickly. So I want to mention that first of all. If you know what extreme psychiatric distress looks like, it's going to look the same. So I guess first, I with that said, I want to talk about how it might look uniquely different in this population. And I want to talk about that from the perspective of the person with a disability, and also what you might see in the people around them, in their caregivers, their loved ones. So for the person with the disability, what might cause this? Major abrupt changes in their support or in the routines around them, or maybe even minor changes. Extreme isolation, abuse, neglect, or bullying. And our population, this population is really susceptible to bullying. Lack of access to medical and mental health care. It's not out there what this population of people really need. And so without the access to that information and that support, they're more likely to slip into crisis. Sensory overload. I think it's really important when we're talking about autistic people to recognize how large of a role sensory input and sensory overload plays. And I'll also just add, sometimes we don't know what causes the crisis. I've been there with my own son where I don't understand necessarily what he's experiencing or why. And I can get wrapped up on the cause and not really focus on the what's happening and how to help. So I think that's worth mentioning also. With caregivers of people with disabilities, what might cause them to slip into crisis? I think sometimes a family is barely holding it together. And the smallest change in the safety net that's holding the family up can really send the whole family into crisis, which can result in a psychiatric event for a person with a disability. In the same way I said with people with disabilities, isolation, a lack of access to medical and mental health care, lack of access to appropriate support, financial strain, other children to care for. These are all things that might, when added together, contribute to a family and a person being more likely to slip into crisis. So then let's talk about what it might look like. People with disabilities might be exhibiting violence and aggression. They might be eloping, withdrawing, cutting themselves off in a room and not willing to spend time with anyone. There might be self-harm, perseverating, really focusing on the same concern or the same topic in an intensely anxious way, ongoing dangerous and impulsive behavior. And in parents and caregivers, what is this going to look like? They may or may not call it crisis. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it as a caregiver, you might not see the crisis for what it is. You might not realize it's reached a level of that. But what you might hear is, I can't do this anymore, or I'm done. I need him to go somewhere else. Again, you might see withdrawal and isolation, lack of engagement with providers, or over engagement with providers. And you might also see families that are feeling irritable, demanding, impatient. I think those are really good indicators that the family is in crisis, when a normally easy to get along with family starts really showing the strain. So that's a really fast overview, but that's kind of what I would say is what I've experienced with the families I support. When I see that, these things is what I see, is when I see crisis in a family.
That was fantastic, Rachel. Really, really great summary. I think, several of the points resonating with me. I think the bullying, that this population puts up with. One of the things that's interesting also related to autism, is the delay in social awareness often. And often though, that social awareness then comes in and it develops, but it's often develops at like the worst time, like right in middle school. And some kids that maybe thought that these other kids were their friends are actually making fun of them. And it can really set a kid that had been doing really well all of a sudden now is experiencing these crises. So very, very excellent point. I was wondering if I could take the same question to you, Paul, from, kind of from your perspective on this kind of higher level at the healthcare authority. I mean, what do you guys view the crisis as in this population? What does it look like from your perspective?
I might just be like I'm going to church and just say amen to Rachel. Rachel, what you described was really on target. And so wraparound with intensive services are WISE. We have these teams throughout the state. And it used to be that if somebody had developmental disabilities, then DDA would kind of take those kids, and mental health not so much. And Don Koenig's on, and he can tell me if I'm off topic on this, but I think that I'm pretty accurate saying that was the case for a long time, and then increasingly we were getting kids that were autistic and had other developmental delays, and our WISE provider said we really don't know how to handle some of these things that we're seeing, so we brought in a trainer. Was I guess a couple of years ago. Her name was Linda Salmon from Michigan. Taylor, maybe you know her, and her basic message was that these are people, and many of the things that we're seeing look just like anybody else. And Rachel, that's kind of what you were describing. The toughest ones we face often, though, are with kids that can't articulate what's going on with them. So it doesn't mean that they have an intellectual delay, but they may have some difficulty describing what's going on with them. And so just as Rachel mentioned, oftentimes the crises come from self-harm or harm to others. One of the really tough things that we face is if a kid is being violent towards the parent or other people in the home. And what the family wants is somebody to provide safety in a way that behavioral health providers are not able to. Really, behavioral health providers are not able to lay hands on kids, and families often express the need, well, we need somebody to help us restrain the child. And so oftentimes that's what it looks like. And nobody wants to have somebody go to the hospital or to jail, and yet that's where oftentimes these crises end up. And so I think those are things that we see at the state when things escalate to the place where we've got 15, 20 people on a conference call once a week to deal with some things that we're just not very good at. And, we end up looking for some place that's out of state to place people at. So that's oftentimes what we look at. And as Rachel said, oftentimes what's going on would be very similar to somebody else, but we're just not very good at, in many cases, at understanding what's driving the behavior and how do we address that. So I hope that's useful, Gary, at least at this point.
Yeah, I think that's great, Paul. I think that you and I have been in this doing this stuff for a while in the state, and it feels like these crisis events in some way continue to represent how we've been just behind in the game. For 20 years, we're behind in access to diagnostic services. We were behind in earlier intervention services, and it feels like we've made some gains in those areas. And now, but this generation is moving into their teens and their adults, and they're again dealing with lack of training and know-how by the providers in the community. And I know we're going to be hitting on this more as we talk about kind of barriers. I wonder if I could take kind of a slight variation on that same question, though, and go to Molly and kind of get, Molly, your perspective on when you're, as a clinical psychologist, when you're working with an individual with autism, how is it unique? What's different about a crisis in this population than maybe somebody without autism?
Yeah, thank you for asking me that. And I do really want to echo something that Rachel said that I think is really vital here, which is that sometimes as clinicians, especially, we try so hard to look for what's different and explain it with diagnoses, because I think it makes us feel a little more comfortable, right? We have a label, we can name it. And the reality is that when people are in crisis, it is so similar across populations, right? When I work with folks, I'm really not interested in, is this your autism? Is this your depression? Is this your anxiety? What I'm interested in is, how is this impacting your functioning, and how much are you suffering? And I don't need a diagnosis to decide that part. I know that that's what's most important. So I think really, if we as clinicians could maybe take a step back from trying to decide whether to explain this as autism or mental health, I think that would be incredibly helpful to a lot of people. And also, there are certainly some things that might look different for someone with autism, although their suffering is certainly no different. A couple of the big things I think about are, for one, how people communicate how their distress and what that means for them, and that sometimes that might look different from what we might see with someone who is typically developing. It may be more difficult for folks to explain what their distress is and where it comes from and what it feels like, right? And so I think that also means that for parents, for caregivers, for clinicians, we need to take people at face value when they are struggling with explaining what's going on, or why, or how they feel, or why they feel a certain way. That is an extremely difficult skill for most people in life, to really get to the depth of what's causing their emotional distress. And it's something that we have to work at for crisis planning, right? I also think about some people call it rigidity. I think of it as like strong convictions sometimes with folks with autism, that sometimes it can be so hard for us as people trying to help people with autism who might be having a crisis, because they may have very, very strong convictions about why something is wrong, why it has to be fixed, why it is distressing to them. And sometimes it can be so easy to get kind of drawn into a back and forth about whether that's accurate or not. And I want to encourage folks that sometimes it's not really relevant if that belief is accurate or not. What is relevant is that it is true to that person at that moment, and it is distressing to them. I would also just point out too that for folks who may be involved with the care of someone with autism, and this goes for providers and practitioners as well, remembering that I know sometimes we talk about people who self-harm, or who experience suicidality, and I hear the word manipulative or manipulation thrown around a lot. And I actually really want to dissuade people from using that terminology. When people are suicidal, when they're experiencing self-harm, they are truly miserable and suffering. And sometimes that is the only way that they can figure out to try and effectively communicate that misery to us. And when we call it manipulation, I think we really miss the person behind those emotions and those behaviors. And that is certainly true for people with autism as well.
Thanks, Molly. Those were some amazing points that you made. I love that last one especially. Lindsay, same question to you. I think you work both on the inpatient unit at Seattle Children's and outpatient at Seattle Children's. I mean, how is this population? Let's say somebody does get into the hospital or gets into a crisis situation. How is that handled at the hospital? Is it handled differently, or with this population, or the same?
So, thanks. I will say Molly is a tough act to follow. I think she made so many excellent points that I would just absolutely agree that, and echoing again, she's echoing Rachel, and I'll echo too, just the importance of recognizing just that this individual is experiencing crisis, and that, that's not necessarily reflective of their disability. They need a safe space. And again, yes, I'm oftentimes encountering those individuals in the context of them entering the inpatient unit. You know, and we do have some guidelines of care for individuals who present with the ability to engage in milieu therapy, meaning they can go to groups, they can participate with peers, but we may need to allow them the opportunity to take breaks and recognize that they may have the unique experiences of being potentially more kind of overloaded by kind of sensory input, that being in those social situations may be more overwhelming, that they may need to take some space. Everybody has the ability to engage on an individual level. So, as individual providers, therapists are meeting with these individuals, making sure that, they're approaching that with the understanding of kind of the communication style that this individual has. I think Molly alluded to this, that, we need to recognize that, what these individuals are experiencing is what they're experiencing. What they're telling us is what they're trying to reflect that experience. And it may not necessarily come out in a way that, us as providers kind of can relate to. And I think having that ability to be flexible, to be in that space with them, to listen. And again, the unit is a place just to kind of contain for safety. It's meant to be for crisis stabilization. Oftentimes, this is a time for us to work with families and parents and help, figure out, what is working, what other supports and services can we help bring into the situation, so that, as we transition out of the hospital, we can, have some increased safety planning in the home, and hopefully be able to identify some other ways to bring in support to help, prevent future crises.
I loved how both you and Molly really kind of focused on the importance of listening to the person, and taking what the person is saying as face value. And it's great. And it's great opportunity to cut over to Taylor and kind of have Taylor give Taylor, I don't know your personal history with regards to interfacing with the mental health world, but I know you talk to a lot of people, so I don't know. Can you reflect for us from your lived perspective what this might be like interfacing with the mental health system?
I can, absolutely. So my personal history with it is that in the 90s, I went through ABA. I went through ABA up until about age 12 to 14. At that point, I was let go. I was released from service. And there's a substantial difference now that I find between the services that I had received and the services that I, as a behavioral technician, as someone going to become a board certified behavioral analyst, utilize in my day-to-day work. In the 90s, their behavioral health treatment, behavioral health services as we know it, was not nearly as concrete. It was not as fluid. It was not as organized. I guess you can kind of refer to it as like the wild, wild west in a sense. Whereas if you were to receive services now, depending on the provider, it would be dramatically different. It would be more structured because the ACB, the Behavioral Analytic Control Board, exists nowadays. It did not exist in the 90s. So what I went through growing up was not the same as what I practice nowadays. And to even underscore that even more, I received treatment in 3 different states. I received treatment here in Michigan, I received treatment in Tennessee, and I received treatment in Washington State as well. So over the course of almost a decade and a half, I received behavioral health treatment in 3 different states and I was diagnosed in Michigan at the age of 3. So in that sense, I got to see receive and be subjected to a wider variety of services and treatments that I guess you can say nowadays we would call experimental during the 90s and the early 2000s. as opposed to nowadays where it is far more analytical, it is far more information data driven, and things are far more categorized. And I wanted to touch on a point that both Molly had raised, but also that others had raised periodically about the label of various use of labels, because I know that in my experience and also in my interactions with the community, with members of my tribe, is that there is a great deal of gridlock between how terms are used. Now, for example, I alternate the use of terms between someone who's high functioning and someone who's just further along on the spectrum, or a variation of that. High functioning I use as a medical term. I will use it when I'm talking to someone either as a behavioral technician or when I'm talking to a coworker, I'm talking to someone in the sense of behavioral health or ABA. If I'm trying to talk to someone within the community, I would probably alternate that term. But the issue with terms right now is that because there is that divide between the community and the medical field, that these terms are interchangeable in that the community doesn't necessarily appreciate that as much. But the fact of the matter is that the medical field doesn't have a better term really in terms of measuring someone's progress within their own autism.
Awesome, Taylor. Thank you so much. You know, this whole thing about labels that you hear us kind of bringing up has been it's been a barrier. It's been a barrier, and it's interfered at times. You know, we've tried to access mental health services for teens and adults suffering depression and anxiety, and often we would get pushback in the referral, you know, saying like, "Oh, we don't treat autism," and we're saying we're not asking you to treat autism. We're asking you to treat a human who has depression and anxiety. It's, you know, it's not until more recent years that the fields have become to start to recognize this, and it is this big kind of catch-up game, and a lot of people have not benefited from this more kind of progressive view. And it's thank you for sharing that you know, kind of experience from your perspective. I'm sure people watching the audience would love to hear even more from you about that. But I'm going to keep moving on because I do want to talk a little bit about barriers. I'm going to come to Paul on this. And so what do you view, again, from the Washington state level about kind of barriers to crisis support for this population?
Sure. So I think some of the barriers we have is a limited spectrum of services. I think somebody had mentioned in the comments that WISE wasn't intensive enough for their needs, and we don't have services that are more intensive than WISE and less intensive than hospitalization or CLIP. And I think that's a real barrier where we don't have the very intensive outpatient kind of services that some families are really in need of. Another one of the barriers that we struggle with is just training, is we are expected increasingly to work with families and kids that have autism. This is a place where I know when I went to grad school many years ago, I had zero training on it. And unfortunately, I don't know that there is that much more training that happens to clinicians that are coming out of grad school at this point. And so we have, you know, some need for training. Fortunately, I think that's one we're going to make some progress on. So I think those are two of the barriers that I see right away.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that those are super important, and it is. I think we'll be able to highlight some of the things that the progress that healthcare authority has been making in that area. Lindsay, could you give us the kind of the perspective from a provider at Seattle Children's? What are some of the barriers that face you and Seattle Children's in serving this population in crisis?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, Paul spoke to, you know, the kind of gap in services kind of between, you know, if WISE is not, you know, intensive enough, and kind of the next step up is hospitalization. And we find that to be the case, for individuals, without autism that are, we're trying to transition out of the hospital and need, more intensive services, a partial hospitalization program, an intensive outpatient program. And there's just there's a shortage of that kind of intensive treatment in our state. And then for individuals, with autism, again, while their needs may be, very similar in terms of needing to continue to work on skill acquisition around, coping with negative emotions, coping with distress, learning how to manage urges to engage in, self-harm behaviors, manage those experiences of having suicidal thoughts. Sometimes there are exclusions. If these are individuals who manage distress in an externalizing way, meaning they engage at times in disruptive behaviors that may include aggression, that can be an exclusion for access into some of those step-down subacute programs. So again, this is a barrier for youth across, all kind of who present with mental health crises. And again, I do think there can be this added layer of challenge for accessing care for individuals with autism. And as Paul spoke to, we are engaging in more training, those that are taking on these patients in programs like WISE, are wanting more training, understanding of even though they may understand have a really strong grasp of behavioral health and the needs of somebody with, an experience like major depression and suicidality, they need to understand how that can present in some unique ways with individuals who have co-occurring developmental disabilities like autism.
Thanks, Lindsay. I want to move to thinking about what can be done, for individuals. Just open it up if anybody's got at this point any additional comments. Rachel, you had something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have something I just wanted to add really quick. When we talk about barriers, I think it's also really important to think about language and cultural barriers that are a part of this experience, especially like these systems are incredibly complicated to navigate. Finding the services that are the right fit for your kid and that your insurance is going to pay for and that you could afford and that you could manage in the lifestyle of your family can be incredibly complicated. And to try to do it when you don't speak English or when people aren't believing you because they're more likely to assume a behavior issue than a mental health concern because of the color of your skin, these accessing help becomes just infinitely.
And we even hear from some of our communities, your fear in even calling 911, and getting access to that. And so it's a great point. Nobody's mentioned the largest elephant in our current room with COVID-19 and the added barrier that's created. So let's go, Molly, let's do a little pretend play, and let's pretend that you have access to anything that you want. What was a kind of in a perfect world, what does best practice therapy and approach and support look like for an individual in crisis?
Well, I can say that there are some key components that would be true for anyone, whether they have autism or not, and true to all therapeutic intervention. There is no one best fit for everybody. Things need to be tailored to fit the individual. There are a couple things that I think are really relevant to think about in terms of treatment, and some of the big things that I think about are, first off, when someone says that they are suicidal or that they are engaging in self-harm, we need to take that seriously at the first step, right? I think there is sometimes, like I mentioned before, a tendency to think, well, this is manipulation. They're not a real cutter. Real cutters end up in the hospital. Those kinds of really invalidating statements. And when someone expresses distress that way, we need to take it seriously and respond at the same time that they express that distress instead of kind of waiting to see what happens. For mental health providers and ABA providers, I would also say I know I hear lots of people say, I don't ask about suicidality because either I'm afraid of the answer, or I have heard that asking about it can make people think about it more. I know it's scary to hear the answer, and sometimes if you ask, you are the only person who's asking in that person's life. You are the only safe place. And if someone is sharing that, right, it also means that they trust you a great deal to be able to share that. And we know we have really good data that shows that asking about suicidality does not increase suicidality. If anything, it is one of the best preventative things that you can do. That goes for caregivers as well. A couple other things to think about too is one of the things that we talk about in dialectical behavior therapy, which is a great therapeutic intervention for people with chronic emotional dysregulation and suicidality and self-harm, is we talk about this, it's called the biosocial theory. And the idea behind it is that people are born with inherent emotional vulnerabilities, right? Some people react more strongly to emotional situations or challenges. Some people stay activated for a longer amount of time. Some people take longer to come back down. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a biological sensitivity, the same way we're born with different colored eyes. What we know is that when you have that biological sensitivity, and you're met with what we think of as a chronically invalidating environment, that is really where strong, pervasive emotional distress comes from. And I want to be clear that when I talk about an invalidating environment, this doesn't mean that people intentionally invalidate you. It means that the environment is not a good fit for your presentation. So I think of it as if you are born and you can't eat gluten and you're born into a family of bakers, that's not intentionally invalidating, but it is a mismatch, right? And so I think a lot about people with autism are already born into an environment that is frequently invalidating of them, whether that's pervasive and intentional, like bullying, or whether it's people not understanding the way that you might choose to communicate, or whether you have specific topics you really want to share about, special interests, right? People can be unintentionally invalidating and can send the message that your emotions are not valid, aren't real, aren't worth talking about. And that can lead to the kind of that heightened level of distress and expression of that distress. So I just want to put that out there because I think it's a good way to think about this that doesn't place blame anywhere. It's a no fault idea, right? And so when we think about frequently what is missing for a lot of people who experience suicidality is the validation that their experiences are real and true and fair and accurate, right? When someone tells you that they're miserable, they are miserable and you don't have to question it, right? So lots of validation is really important here. And I know the question always comes up like, well, wait, am I supposed to validate when they break stuff in my house, right? No, we don't validate invalid behavior, right? What we validate is the emotion underneath that. I can tell you're so pissed off right now. I can tell you're so sad. What do we do about that, right? The other piece that I think about too is how do you develop a life worth living? That's the life you want to live, not the life that's being planned for you in an intervention, because so often we forget when we plan goals that we need to ask other people, most especially our clients, what their goals are. And so thinking about when you are in crisis, that is not the time that I'm going to go through and plan your entire career with you and what your goals need to be. I want to know what is the one thing that if we could change it, it would make your life 1% better or 1% more bearable right now. And if you tell me that that's something at school, then you better believe that that's what I'm going to go after. Because that's really what we're looking for is incremental change to make your life more livable and more valuable to you. I do want to say dialectical behavior therapy, like I mentioned, is a really fabulous resource, and it is in incredibly short supply. It is really hard to find. Children's actually has a DBT program, and it is one of the few places that accepts Medicaid. DBT is a very comprehensive program, and I think that there are lots of therapists out there that are DBT informed, and that's great. But I would encourage folks that are interested in DBT to really look into how comprehensive it is, because it should have multiple types of intervention. The last thing I'll say, because I know that I'm droning on a little bit, because clearly I could talk about this for a while. I do really want to encourage that mental health therapy and ABA are not one and the same. They do not have the same goals, and they do not have the same training. While I'm a BCBA myself, and I will say that there's certainly an important place for ABA for lots of people if it feels like the right fit. But ABA is not the place to address suicidality and self-harm, because there's a mental health component under there that needs to be addressed, and not addressing it is inherently invalidating to someone. So I want to actually relieve some of our ABA providers of feeling like you have to deal with that. This is the right place to consult with and refer for mental health treatment.
But I think, Molly, the point of listening, that you made, that some providers are even afraid to ask the question. A theme that's coming out of tonight is the importance of all of us to listen, and to listen to the need, and to take what a person is saying is real. And I think that all of our providers need to listen and hear. And if it's something that you can't handle, then you need to help that person find those resources. I think it's a perfect segue actually to move over to Dawn. And as I think about, Dawn working in the WISE program, the wraparound program, and working in Washington State, working with the Medicaid population, if an individual is enrolled in Medicaid, how can that individual best seek and access crisis supports in Washington State?
You bet. It's great listening to everybody, and the information that you're sharing. It's just very valuable. One of the things I want to recognize first is that it's very obvious that we need to do more, and from a practitioner perspective, we want to do more. We're playing catch up, and I think several people have mentioned that we know that services for people with autism and developmental disorders, developmental disorders, they're grossly underfunded, and that needs to change. And I think we all can work unitedly to support that, and work and advocate for that. When it comes to crisis services, especially for the Medicaid population, um, perhaps one way to describe it is that if you're in crisis, in every community, in every county, in every region, there is a designated crisis line, and they're operated differently by region, of course. They're designed to meet the regional variances, the populations that reside in those communities. But there's a crisis line, and if we start from that perspective, when you call, you will be able to talk with someone with experience that can direct you to a service that you could benefit from, a resource. They're there to listen, they're there to assess, they're there to connect. That's one of the first things. So in each different region, there are different entities that operate those initial services. But the crisis line might be one place where you interface with when you have in a crisis and you have needs. The designated mental health crisis line is not the only resource. As many of you are aware, NAMI is a resource, and they provide services in different locations. For example, in Clark County, there are resources designated for youth, such as Teen Talk. They're a great resource. There are also other religious resources that are out there. But if you started with calling the crisis line, they would listen, assess, and try and connect you to services that would be helpful. And then what they would do is, depending on the county that you reside, there's a different array of crisis responders that could be available. For example, I'm a part of Catholic Community Services, and we operate in Western Washington, and in several different locations in Pierce County and Thurston Mason and in Clark County. We have mobile crisis services where we can respond to crisis, and depending on the assessment there can be other services that can be provided. But mobile crisis services are only available in certain locations in the state, and that's something that we recognize funding should be made available, and those services should be addressed. So from that crisis response, you might start in accessing crisis services through the crisis line, and that's readily available. Google, in your community would provide that, and that's where you might start. Once you get connected to a clinician, obviously that's where the preventative work, the therapy, the treatment would occur. And if you were in crisis, for example, while seeing a clinician, a behavioral health clinician, receiving behavioral health care in Medicaid, if something were to go on, you would call that facility, that clinician. And most times you probably wouldn't connect with that clinician because that clinician's probably working with other people. That's what they're supposed to be doing, and scheduling and working with individuals and families. But calling the agency and the clinician would be one way to get crisis response and get some support that way. Each behavioral health organization is supposed to have some after hours information number. Some of them have access to an on-call clinician or a supervisor. And throughout the state of Washington, there certainly is a variety and a difference in scope of coverage in crisis. And working with a behavioral health provider, a clinician, the best thing that they can do is to develop a safety crisis plan with the consumer, with the family. And in that safety crisis planning, hopefully they're identifying several of the proactive strategies and things that can do the child, the youth, the individual could be engaged in doing before they blow up. And I know that parents are the best at identifying distractions, healthy distractions, other things that they can do before escalation happens so much that the crisis occurs and everything is out of control. A good safety crisis plan also involves those steps that you need to take once a full-blown crisis happens. What do you do from there, and what can be helpful. And some of the most, I think the most recent training, I know that Catholic Community Services and others are going through, really involves a neurobiological and trauma-informed approach to crisis response. And it's really trying to understand the brain better. And, when you're in crisis, there's that primitive brain, that reactionary fight or flight situation that the person is in, and that escalates everybody. And so we need to understand the three things, really, ourselves, whoever's trying to intervene, whoever's trying to help. What can we do to move from that primitive brain and move the person who's in crisis from that primitive brain and limited functioning to working with the evolved brain, where there's rational empathy and reason and problem solving. But we got to understand ourselves first and work from that perspective, calm down, and then understand the crisis. And it's been mentioned before, there are many different reasons why a person with autism might be in crisis, and we need to assess and understand that and intervene accordingly. And the last thing is to really understand the person in crisis. And the best crisis response is that which the person that is helping regulates themselves and then gets a better picture of what is going on, and then works with the person in crisis to calm down and then move from that primitive fight or flight to more taking steps towards being able to reason, being able to sense a better have a better sense of empathy and really be able to engage in problem solving. And many times what happens was we jump in too soon and we try and engage in problem solving from the very beginning, and we're still operating from that primitive brain. And what we need to do is allow things to calm and do everything that we can to calm things down, and then after that we can work more effectively. I may have given a broad response to what we're doing in behavioral healthcare and especially in working with within the Medicaid system, but I know that the resources that we have, I would say once again, they're underfunded, and we need to develop the capacity to provide more services and increase the services. And I think one of the things, and another thing that is really helpful, is that the research and the training is helping us to be more effective as we learn how to serve this population better.
That was awesome summary, Don. I want to stay with you just on that kind of last point, and you kind of, again, the value of you with your perspective from years working here in Washington State. Is there something that you could highlight that excites you about where we have moved, the progress that we have made in serving this population? I know we are underfunded. I know we need more, but is there anything that you can highlight that you have seen that we have made progress in?
You bet. In the last 4 or 5 years, what Washington State has done is move to, and it's a lot easier to say than do, but to move from really individual agencies such as juvenile justice, substance abuse treatment, mental health, and certainly developmental disabilities, to move from that siloed approach to work towards greater integration. And so in the last 4 to 5 years, the state has really undertaken a massive change to work towards integrating physical care with behavioral health care. And what I've seen is instead of an approach where we are really separate and siloed and working independently, what I see is a greater emphasis on integrating care and behavioral health in many different regions. Behavioral health is becoming embedded in more healthcare centers. And again, it's just the beginning of what needs to take place, but there's more of a focus on integrating total health care for individuals. I've seen the implementation of WISE. There used to be just a few communities that actually provided wraparound or intensive services and home-based, community-based intensive services. And now the state has made funding available so that in every region, WISE is being provided. And I see WISE providers really reaching out to want to learn more how to work with this population and develop that capacity. I'll remind you that previous to just a few years ago, we operated so independently that mental health really was not allowed to do a whole lot of work, extensive work with someone who is autistic or had a developmental disability. That was something that other people did, developmental disabilities in these silos. But I'm seeing, and I'm very encouraged by the integration that's happening, the research and the training that the state is making available to support that neurobiological and trauma-informed approach. And I think that is encouraging, despite the fact that we do have a lot of work yet to do.
Awesome. Yeah, Don, I totally agree. And I feel the same way. I in one of those silos, and you and I got to start to know each other this past year as we are interfacing more closely with providers in the WISE program. And I'm so encouraged by the thirst for knowledge, on how to better serve this population. So I am hopeful, and I agree with you. We're not home yet. We're not where we need to be. So, but it is good to see the progress. Paul, do you want to speak to that? Same kind of anything to add to what Don said from the state level on kind of what we're doing?
The truth is, I tend to turn to Don to get perspective because he's been around and understands the stuff really well from a boots on the ground kind of level. We're doing our darndest to break down those barriers. When I worked in the mid '80s at a SUD treatment center, SUD was completely separate from mental health, and we tried to overcome that and said, all right, we're going to call that co-occurring. And now when we talk about co-occurring, it can be SUD and mental health, and it can also be developmental. And so we just have to recognize that, all of those things are conditions that a person can have. And so we still have a lot of work to do to break down some of those barriers, but it is very high on our priority list at Healthcare Authority. And we work really hard to partner with our sister agencies at DDA and with the ABA providers. They moved the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery from DSHS over to Healthcare Authority, where the Medicaid program is, so that we could have a better connection with the ABA providers, because that's how that gets funded. So we recognize we got shortcomings, and we're really focused on getting that better. Gary, you know that we do the Project Echo with our WISE providers to try and increase the skills that they've got in working with autism and developmental disabilities. So it's not like we're not making any progress, but it never feels like we're making it quick enough. And I really feel for the parents and families that see the shortcomings.
Thanks, Paul. To stay on time, we're gonna keep moving. I know we could. Each of you probably is dying to add your little bits, but I wanted to go to Taylor. I wanted to give an opportunity to kind of get your kind of lived perspective and thinking about an individual in their, like what might an individual do in their lifestyle, in your perspective, to help kind of prevent recurrent. Let's say they've gone through a crisis, or they are facing crisis. What can a person do in their lifestyle to kind of help combat that?
Well, firstly, I want to point out and say that autism, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to have autism. I think there's generally there tends to become this stigma surrounding it, and I know that the community itself often feels that stigma very much, that some people think that, oh, well, you have autism, so da, 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 da. But the fact of the matter is that people with autism, and I've lived by this statement, is that when those of us with autism get, however we do it, whether it's through ABA, whether it's through additional services or other services, however we can do it, when we get to the same quote unquote level of the other neurotypical, of other quote unquote normal people, we tend to bring the rest of humanity up with us. So I often live and breathe that statement because I'm a living example of it. So, and that is what I have tried, whether it's in my self-advocacy or whether it is within my role in the behavioral health field. That is what I've tried to do in any way I can do it. So it's okay for autism to exist. It's okay to say, yes, you have autism, or yes, my child has autism. There shouldn't be this negativity surrounding it. I think that stigma, that negativity often leads to crisis, because let's face it, and I love that Molly talked about this a little bit, that there is not a common understanding of what is autism. What does it mean to have autism? What does it mean for someone to be autistic in this world? Every friends of mine that are autistic, other kiddos I've worked with that have autism, I tell them, look, if life is a game, the fact of the matter is that the rules of life, there are a series of rules in the game of life. There are rules that apply to everyone. There are rules that are made by some people, and there are rules that we can influence. Unfortunately, we in our community are not on any of those levels just yet. God willing, in my lifetime, not only will be we be able to get to the level to where we're influencing the rules, but we're also helping make them. And by those rules, I mean the cultural rules, the societal rules, and other things of that scale, whether they're laws, regulations, what have you. Because I think that partly is where you get these crises, where you get these instances where there's a child having a meltdown in a store, or there's a child that is having a hard time in school because they can't understand what's being asked of them. Or there's a child that's on a playground and just simply wants their turn on the swing. It's the fact that there is not this common understanding is what ultimately I feel ends up fueling and feeding into these crises. So the first thing I would say is as someone with autism, anytime I meet with someone, I get a feel for them. I talk to them. I get to know them, and then I let them know that yes, I'm autistic. And reactions have varied to then, oh my God, you're autistic. I would have never guessed. And sometimes those can be very pleasant reactions, because sometimes that might just mean that okay, you fit in, so to speak. Or the latter one, the great surprise might just come to be that they would have never guessed that you could possibly be autistic. So the first is just making others. The first rule I say is just make people who you meet, people who you form relationships with and friendships with, let them be understanding of your circumstances. Second, be aware and conscientious of your environment, where you're going, what that environment could entail. Because if you're very cognizantly aware of what could potentially set you off, whether it's a trigger, whether it's a behavior, whether or not it will devolve into a crisis, understanding those and understanding what situations and in what environments those could occur in often tends to help out tremendously. If you're like me, sometimes certain noises in certain social situations can set you off. I avoid malls. I avoid certain crowded spaces just because simply it just makes me feel. It won't set me into crisis, but it's just not necessarily a pleasant experience for me. So making others understand your circumstances, understanding yourself, and understanding your environments. And also understanding what circumstances could create so-called crises or could cause you to lock down, shut down, have a moment, whatever you want to call it. The fact of the matter is that the first key thing is understanding yourself, understanding the world that's around you, and making others aware of who you are will help go far in life. And that is what I have constantly tried to preach and constantly have tried to make parents, clinicians, technicians, lawyers, in my various 7 years of being an advocate, talking to people with many different agencies, many different providers, many different organizations. I've just tried to browbeat and thump this like it's the law of the land, to say we have to bridge this gap. We have to make this common land, this common understanding. Because when we can't do that, then that is ultimately where we will see more of these instances of situations.
Awesome, Taylor. A couple things really stood out as I was listening to you. That was really, really beautiful. One thing about advocacy, like developing that skill of self-advocacy and expressing what you need. I often hear from adults that I work with on how they wish that parents and providers had helped them develop those self-advocacy skills earlier in life. And the other thing that resonates that I've heard over and over again is your point about autism pride, and it's not, don't always focus on the negative. I think as so many providers and parents are very focused on the negative instead of celebrating the positive. And I think helping, if we can't help individuals celebrate that. It's hard. It's hard for them. Rachel, can you share with us kind of your perspective on with regards to the family unit? What can a family do, and what can we do to help a family that has an individual in crisis? You're on mute, Rachel.
Sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. And I was hoping to add one thing on to what he just said, which was in addition to finding that pride in your identity and finding the voice to self-advocate, I really encourage finding mentors who share that identity. A lot of times when I talk to autistic adults, what they say they really needed as young people were adult versions of themselves. And I think that goes a long way towards teaching that, instilling that pride and teaching those self-advocacy skills, as if not a non-neurotypical person is teaching that to you. So that's my first thought. But talking about family, the first thing I want to say about how to support a family is this: believe them. Listen, hear what they're saying. When they tell you they're in crisis, believe them. Don't make them prove it. Don't make them repeat it over and over again. The families that I work with have had a lifelong battle, especially when we're talking about people who are autistic and don't have an intellectual disability. Their disabilities tend to be more invisible. And parents have spent their entire child's lives trying to get people to believe the disability exists. And so when crisis hits, they really don't want to have to do that. So that's my first thought. My first comment is believe them and don't make them repeat it a lot. After that, my opinion and my experience is what parents and families want more than anything is help finding the resources, help finding the services and supports their youth need. Like I said earlier, it's incredibly complicated and hard to find what's out there and to know what's the right fit for your kid and to know what is the right therapy or treatment for this particular situation that they're in. So anything you can do to logistically help them find what they're looking for and to assist them in the legwork. I can't tell you how often parents are just handed a stack of papers with a list of phone numbers and how unhelpful that can be in the midst of a crisis. Anything you can do to take the load, to lighten the load on them. And a lot of times that might be making the phone calls for them, filling out the paperwork for them, printing out the application and putting it in the mail for them. I'll also say, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think a major indicator that crisis is coming is isolation. And a major way to help mitigate that impact on the family is to reduce that isolation. Surround them with people, with community, with support groups, with a religious community, whatever is going to be meaningful and supportive to them, but take active steps to assist them in reducing that isolation for themselves and to be surrounded by people who get it. And I'll take this opportunity to plug Parent to Parent at the Arc of King County, which provides that kind of one-on-one mentorship for parents raising kids with developmental disabilities. And I think when a family goes into crisis, finding another family who's been through it and who has some experience to share and also can say, it's okay, you're going to get through this. I know because I've been there, can make a tremendous difference. I also, in addition to all of this, would suggest support this family in increasing their access to information and to knowledge. Help them learn more about this condition, whatever they're facing, the suicidality, the anxiety disorder, autism itself. So often families are starting at a really minimal level of knowledge and understanding. I worked with a family once who the first time she ever heard the word autism was when her son was diagnosed with it. So assume in some cases, presume competence in that these families are smart and they know their kids well, but their intellectual, their knowledge level might be low, and helping them gain knowledge will increase confidence and will increase not only confidence in knowing how to make good decisions, but confidence in their ability to hold the family together and to get through whatever they're facing. And then last, I want to say, be patient with families. be willing to repeat information multiple times, be willing to resend the application several times, be patient. The intensity of parenting a person in crisis is hard to describe. The intensity of parenting a person who tells you that they want to commit suicide is almost too much to make it through each day, and to try to do what you can for that child and to try to do what you can for your other children. It's a lot. So be compassionate, be empathetic. I say this all the time when I talk about what the parent experience is. You're not getting us at our best. I'm a really nice person, but when I'm dealing with this level of crisis in my kids, I stop being such a nice person, and I stop being patient, and I stop being easygoing and flexible. And I really, really appreciate the providers who are okay with that. I'm not abusive, and I'm not saying allow abuse to be treated abusively, but to understand you're not getting my best, and to be okay with that, and to be supportive and understanding and patient. So that's my answer. And I want to add one more thing. Be really, really sensitive to the various cultural influences that will impact how a family is going to feel about the crisis and how they're going to approach the crisis. Disability and mental health are incredibly culturally specific and culturally defined. And so don't make a lot of assumptions about how one community might experience that crisis versus another. And also be providing this is a really simple one, but make sure you have language interpreters available, because these are really complicated conversations and really nuanced conversations, and trying to have a conversation on these topics in your non-native language can be almost impossible. So that's my thoughts on how to be supportive of families.
Thanks, Rachel. That was great, and this has been a very rich discussion, and I'm glad we've had the time. I had a last question, but I think it's about kind of what do you wish that we could do, or what could the community do? I want to just open this up to everybody, and also just if there's some other burning point that you wanted to make. We've got about 9 minutes left. I think we would like to take some questions from the audience. But anything that you feel like we haven't touched on, advice to communities, what could we be doing better? What direction do we hope we go, or just anything else? And try. I'll take a hand if anybody wants to speak up now. If we don't have anything, yeah, Taylor, go ahead. I saw your hand first.
I just wanted to emphasize the topic of listening. I know we had talked about that very early on in this panel. Listening is a very key thing, because it's not just simply from the communal side of it, from the self-advocate portion of the community, but we also should listen to parents, because ultimately they're the ones that want what's best for their kid. So we should really listen to what parents would desire of us. If we can provide whatever services or whatever resources we can to the parents, we should, but we have to begin with that listening factor. And I just think that, granted, this is a general problem we have right now in this country. If you haven't seen any news headlines in the last 3 days, that we currently have just a giant listening problem in general. I think that the more we just listen to each other, I think the better off that a lot of these issues will end up being.
Definitely a theme for tonight. Yeah, that keeps coming up, right? Yeah. Anyone else have any of the burning points they want to add? Don, did you have something?
I did. In that effort from a provider community, trying to do better, wanting to learn how to do that, in different communities, we're trying to do things like form partnerships and getting behavioral health providers together with schools, with DDA, and sharing our resources, increasing the collaboration. Our commitment to doing, for example, in Clark County, we've been trying to get together for a couple of years, once a month, is to talk about how can we collaborate better, how can we share trainings and resources. From that effort, we've put together a couple of trainings, and one training in particular, the highlight was a parent, Darla Helt, spoke, and all of us, over close to 150 different providers were in the audience, and one of the things that she said that was really meaningful and helped us to understand the population that we're serving better, how vital the role is of parents and collaborating and working with them. But she said something I'll never forget. She said, I know that I will be a parent to my son, two adult boys, young men now. I'll be a parent to them and be parenting them until I take my last breath. And just the significance of understanding the commitment of parents and what they do every day, just cemented for all of us as clinicians, as providers, who might think we might want to do this independently. No, we've got to work with parents. We've got to partner with them, increase our understanding, increase our ability to collaborate and work together to find success.
One question that has been coming up from the audience is about, is it important, how do I find a therapist or counselor or med provider that has experience with working with youth with autism? Is that critical? Do you bypass somebody that doesn't have experience? The bird in the hand versus two in the bush. How important is that? Does anyone want to take that question? Nobody.
I think nobody's answering because it's a really hard thing to find. It's almost it's the question, the golden question, I think. So you said it at the beginning, how siloed of a service industry this is, and that's a massive issue, that you either have a doctor who specializes in psychiatric care or you have a doctor who specializes in autism. Trying to find the one that can do both is almost impossible, especially if you're using Medicaid to pay for it. There are resources for help with that. That's the kind of thing we do at the ARC. And I think the Autism Center has family resource coordinators that does similar work. So I definitely encourage families to reach out, that they don't have to do that by themselves. And like I said, my message to providers is do the legwork, help them find it. So that's what we're there to do. But I don't know of a quick answer to that question, like, oh, just look here and you'll find them. Because I don't think many of them exist, unfortunately.
Yeah. Paul?
So one of the things that I want to point out is that this COVID mess has actually taught us that we can do telemedicine really effectively. And one of the things that means is we don't have to be beholden to regional or county lines the way we used to have to be. And so don't get discouraged from, if you're in OMAC, that you may be able to access treatment that's in Seattle in a way that 9 months ago really couldn't happen. And so I think that's something, it's not a panacea, but it's a step forward. And we have consistently heard from providers and from families, and I've experienced it as a consumer myself, that telemedicine for many things works really well, not for everything, but at least for getting some expertise. I think we're better than we were 9 months ago, and that's one of those silver linings to this very dark COVID cloud.
Great point. Lindsay, go ahead.
I think I would just also plug, there is, one of the things that has been funded through the state is the Washington Mental Health Referral Service. And Seattle Children's, there's funding for a program called the Partnership Access Line that's really intended to provide specialized psychiatric consultation services to pediatricians, primary care providers working particularly out in rural communities. I think, I know that oftentimes primary care providers hold a lot of the care for a lot of these youth. But knowing too that there is access to specialized services, they will do consultation. As Paul says, this has actually become a bit more, through telehealth services, we can coordinate these a little bit better. Families aren't having to travel. And then this Washington Mental Health Service, they have people that will help connect to mental health providers. And if the first time it doesn't feel like a good fit, they'll continue to work with families. So that's a really important resource.
Well, I was going to say, to continue on this theme of services and resources, I was just at the Autism Law Summit, and which I've regularly attended for the last 4 or 5 years. Sometimes I forget which year it was. Whatever year we were in Albuquerque, I was Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck at one point. I can't remember which. But I think one thing that is often forgotten, or rather often not spoken of, the fact that resources and services are a finite thing. We can only do so much. And I know we've talked about the lack of funds, the lack of monetary and financial incentive to contribute to this, which is why not only what services we can provide, regardless of whatever it is, behavioral health, mental health, or anything else in between, is that we're trying the best with what we've got. And unfortunately, we're racing against the clock, because there is the autism population is burgeoning. One topic we talked about is the fact that we are facing an aging population issue, in the sense that parents who parented my generation are becoming significantly older. And then we also have had, in my lifetime, a double increase in diagnosis. What I believe is that there's simply a proliferation of autism. So I think what we have to do, or what we need to start doing, and I love that Paul talked about the increase, that COVID was great in showing that we can use technology. I've often advocated for an increase of use in technology and diversifying it, because this is the 21st century, for God's sakes. We're in the year 2020. The fact that in providing services and technology are so stagnant as they are is astounding and, quite frankly, unacceptable to me. But I think also the fact that this could be a great moment where the autistic community, the self-advocates and everything, we can step up and try and reach out and try to help out the rest of us within our tribe, because again, we're not getting as much resources in as needed. So it might just fall on us to kind of step up and either mentor or become more peers, or even start setting up our own organization to help bolster and buttress families and existing supports and services. Because let's face it, time is running out.
And as you said, Taylor, time is running out, and time has run out. And this was of course the hardest part for me was going to figure out how are we going to end tonight, because I knew we were going to not have been able to have time to hit on this topic the way that it deserves. But you guys have done such a great job. I really am so thankful for all of you joining tonight. And we've got some great questions and hopefully we've put in a lot of resources into the chat box as those of you that have been listening on the call. We will have this up on our Facebook Live. That people can watch this if they weren't able to attend live. And how do I end this? Is there anything else I'm supposed to say? Do I do a little tap dance, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But again, I guess I'll just say thanks again to everybody, and thanks to the audience for listening. And one of the themes is listen, and we hope that you were able to take something from this event tonight. So thanks again to the panel on behalf of Seattle Children's as a whole, and everybody behind this event. Thank you for putting this on and allowing us to be here tonight and share these perspectives. So thanks again, everybody.